A single mother ignored at the shooting range until her first shot shattered the champion's record. At the Elite Shooters Club, where reputation is measured by the number of bullseyes hit and a person's worth is defined by the brand of firearm they carry, there is no room for the ordinary. Here, Colton Prescott, revered as the undefeated icon of the elite, walks through the applause as though he was born to dominate this space. His face combines arrogance, privilege, and the habit of crushing anyone who dares cross the invisible line between us and people like you. So, when Rachel Carter, a single mother, dressed simply, holding her 10-year-old son's hand and carrying an old cloth bag, enters, she's not only ignored, but nearly expelled with a glance. To Colton, she was not worthy of stepping into his realm, a place where he reigns through achievements and deceit. But then, the first shot rings out, and that sound tears through the air of arrogance that had engulfed the room. Not only did she hit the bullseye, she shattered the record of the very man who had just called her out of place, and the entire shooting range fell silent. This is not just a story of a competition. This is a clash between arrogance and humility, privilege and perseverance, between a fraud and a woman who once held a gun next to her husband during the years he fought on the front lines. This is the story of Rachel Carter and the fateful shot that changed everything. Rachel Carter walked into the Elite Shooters Club with her son, Ethan, a 10-year-old boy with a small gray backpack and curious brown eyes. In Rachel's hands was an old cloth bag and a sealed envelope, a free shooting lesson invitation from the club, an unexpected gift from a former friend of her husband. Rachel wore a simple green cardigan and jeans, her hair neatly tied back, her face bare but gleaming with determination. Ethan wore a worn-out hoodie and sneakers with scuffed soles, his small hand gripping his mother's as his eyes darted nervously at the colorful strangers who looked like they'd just stepped out of a high-end rifle fashion show. The atmosphere inside froze as they entered. The club members, mostly successful entrepreneurs, politicians, or heirs to prominent families, turned around in unison, gazing at the two of them with distant eyes, as if their presence were a blemish on the perfect pond of the room. A woman wearing Versace glasses nudged the man beside her and whispered, "She's probably lost." A snide laugh echoed nearby. And then, from deep inside the shooting area, a voice rang out with smugness, cutting through the already stifling air. "Maybe you're looking for a supermarket, not a shooting range. Walmart's right across the street." The speaker stepped out from the VIP area. Colton Prescott, the club's #1 shooter, 5-time national champion, with million-dollar sponsorship deals from high-end sports brands. Tall, with slicked-back gelled hair, a fitted leather jacket, and a perpetually smug smile. Colton was the perfect embodiment of privilege and self-satisfaction. The room erupted in synchronized laughter, not loud, but enough to make the air grow colder. Ethan shrank back, pressing closer to his mother. Rachel didn't react. Her gaze remained calm, her hand tightening slightly around her son's as she continued toward the reception desk. But in her brown eyes a spark of something was igniting, not anger, but the cold clarity of someone who had stood at the edge of sorrow and survived to step out. And in that moment a quiet shockwave was set in motion. No one expected that the woman they had just mocked would flip their world upside down with a single shot. Rachel approached the reception desk as the laughter behind her still echoed. She placed the invitation card on the sleek glass surface, accompanied by a polite smile. The receptionist, a blonde girl meticulously made up like a magazine cover model, glanced briefly at the envelope before raising her head, her blue eyes scanning Rachel from head to toe as if evaluating a discounted, outdated item in a high-end store. "Today's shooting session is for members only. I have a formal invitation," Rachel replied, gently but firmly. The girl shrugged, glancing at the card as if it were emitting an unpleasant odor. We don't prioritize outsiders, especially when there's an internal tournament today. Her sweet voice carried an inherent condescension, as though it had been trained to smile just enough without the need for respect. Ethan looked up at his mother, his fingers tightening around her sleeve. He had never seen his mom rejected so outright. In his innocent eyes something began to stir, an innocent confusion, the first real encounter with injustice too close to ignore. Rachel leaned down, brushing a stray lock of hair away from her son's forehead, offering a reassuring smile. She wouldn't let herself get angry, not here. Not with her son watching. And then, Colton Prescott once again barged in the way he always did, loud, showy, and arrogant. He walked up directly, stopping just a few steps from the two of them, folding his arms across his chest as if inspecting a piece of junk to be discarded. Not even on the field yet, and you're already shaking? He looked at Rachel, then at Ethan, the half-smile on his face oozing disdain. You sure you know? This shooting range isn't where you teach your kid how to toss hoops. The members of Colton's group chuckled in unison. One of them nudged Colton. Colt, take it easy with the newbie, who knows? Maybe she's into... Can tossing cans be her thing? Rachel remained silent, but her hand had loosened from her son's shoulder, and she silently reached into her bag, pulling out the card, the one Michael Reeves, Logan's old friend, had sent a week ago. My card is valid, and I'm not here to step on anyone's toes. I just want to practice. Practice? Colton scoffed. He tilted his head, pretending to think. And how exactly are you going to practice? With that worn-out Glock? The group burst into laughter again. Ethan looked at his mother, no longer confused, but anger began to well up in his throat. He didn't understand much about privilege, nor why people thought his mother was weak because of how she looked. But he knew one thing. His mother was the strongest person he knew. Colton stepped even closer, his eyes gleaming with excitement as though he had found a new game to play. All right, he said, his smile turning cold. How about a little challenge? Rachel looked at him, unflinching. I'm not here to play games. That's fine, I want to try. He pulled a check from his jacket pocket, waving it like bait. $10,000 if you hit the bullseye from 50 yards, just one shot. If you miss, you leave. Forever. The atmosphere shifted immediately. A few people stopped shooting and turned their heads. Whispers began to ripple through the room. Rebecca Johnson, the club manager, walked over from a distance, her face hardening. Colton, that's enough. We're just having some fun, Rebecca, Colton replied, his voice sweet like honey mixed with poison. This is a place for serious shooters. Everyone knows that. Rachel still hadn't answered. She looked down at Ethan. The boy looked up, his lips pressed together, trying to appear unafraid. Perhaps in that moment, Rachel realized that silence was no longer an option. She gently placed her hand on her son's shoulder, guiding him to a nearby waiting seat. Stay here. I'll be right back. Ethan nodded, his small hands clenched tightly together. Rachel turned back, her gaze locking on Colton's face. I don't have $10,000 to bet, but if I hit the target, you pay. If I miss, I'll go. Deal? Colton smirked. Finally, a little fighting spirit. He turned to his group, raising his hand. Ladies and gentlemen, prepare to witness a spectacular fall of fragile pride. But what Colton and the rest of the room didn't know was that the woman standing before them had once made a promise made before a folded flag, in the sound of a ceremonial gunshot, beside the grave of a soldier. And today, that promise was about to be fulfilled. Rachel held the old Glock 19 in her hand, walking slowly towards the shooting position as if the noisy scene behind her had faded into nothingness. No one in the room, not Colton Prescott, not Rebecca Johnson, not any of the glitzy crowd and designer brands, knew that the hands holding that gun had once cradled the body of a soldier who died for their country. No one knew that Rachel Carter was the wife of Logan Carter, known as Shadow in SEAL Team 6, a man who was secretly referred to in the military community as a precise ghost, a sniper who the enemy never saw coming before being taken down. 3 years ago, when the helicopter carrying Logan crashed during a mission marked by the red Top Secret label, Rachel stood in Arlington National Cemetery, wearing an old black dress, tightly holding the folded flag handed to her by the unit commander, where a volley of ceremonial shots was fired, but no one clarified what had caused Logan's death. She knew there would never be a full explanation. In the world of men like Logan, the truth was always hidden behind a fog. From the moment they first met in a small cafe in Norfolk, Virginia, Rachel knew Logan was not a normal man. He was quiet, his eyes sharp as though he was always observing more than he spoke. Yet, in that silence, Rachel found an odd sense of peace. 6 months later, they were married. No fanfare, just a few teammates in attendance, all standing quietly, their watchful eyes guarding the ceremony. Life as the wife of a SEAL was never easy. Rachel learned how to endure the absences, how to not ask when Logan came home with new scars, and how to hold back tears every time she saw him off at the door. But Logan, in his own way, always found ways to protect her, literally. After he was lightly injured and had to recover for nearly 2 months, Logan took Rachel to the shooting range for the first time. "If I don't come back, at least you'll know how to protect Ethan," he said as he adjusted her stance, showing her how to hold the gun, how to breathe, how to let the mind drift until only the sights remained. At first, Rachel learned just to reassure him, but before long she began to enjoy the calmness in each breath, the absolute focus as her finger tightened on the trigger. Logan noticed that sooner than she did. "You've got something that can't be taught. Steady hands, fast eyes, and a heart that knows how to control fear." From then on, whenever Logan had time at home, they would go to the range. It wasn't just practice, it was his way of leaving a part of himself with her. The last time they practiced together was 2 days before Logan left for his final mission. That day, he didn't say much. He just stood behind her, adjusting her posture bit by bit, and finally whispered in her ear, "Promise me, if one day you have to use what I've taught you, don't let your hands shake." Rachel never forgot that. Just as she had never opened the safe containing Logan's guns until the day Ethan asked, "Dad taught you how to shoot really well, right? Then why don't you ever shoot anymore?" The boy asked with innocent curiosity, but to Rachel it was a bell tolling. Something inside her that had been dormant for 3 years, the connection, the steadiness, and the self-respect, began to stir. Then, a few days later, an envelope from Michael Reeves, Logan's close friend, arrived in the mailbox. Inside was an invitation to spend a day at the Elite Shooters Club, accompanied by a short note. "Logan would want you to keep your promise. 3 years is enough to mourn. It's time to stand tall." Rachel folded the letter and said nothing. But that night, after Ethan had fallen asleep, she quietly opened the safe for the first time in 3 years. She took out the Glock 19, the gun Logan had customized down to the details to fit her hand, wiped off the dust, and sat alone all night. Not shooting, just holding the gun in her hands, as if holding on to a piece of the past. And now, in the middle of a room full of strangers and sneering gazes, Rachel raised the gun, not for money, not for fame, but for a son watching her with wide eyes, and for a husband who had taught her that there are times when just one shot can speak louder than all the things one can't scream. Still gripping the old Glock 19 tightly, Rachel stood tall at shooting station number 3. Ahead of her, on the metal rack, the target hung 50 yards away, silently waiting, as if even it was questioning, could this slender woman truly know what she was doing? The gun in Rachel's hand wasn't shiny. It didn't have a custom barrel or carbon fiber grip like the expensive weapons around her. Its matte black finish had faded over time, the edges lightly scratched. A gun that didn't show off, but had once been the trusted companion of a true warrior. It was the last thing Logan had touched before he left. She turned to Ethan. The boy was sitting on the waiting bench, his legs swinging lightly, his eyes fixed on his mother. Rachel bent down and placed her hand on his shoulder. "Stay here, Ethan, and remember, I won't let you be ashamed." The boy nodded, quietly but resolutely. "I know, Mom." Rachel turned back, her shoulders unconsciously relaxing. She took a deep breath and raised the gun. Her brown eyes widened, the sights lining up perfectly. For a moment, the whole world shrank down to just 3 points. Her, the gun, and the target ahead. From a distance, Colton Prescott stood with his arms crossed, the corner of his mouth curled up in a slight smirk. He stood among a group of friends and a few VIP guests, his gaze showing no hint of hiding his contempt. "Watch out, everyone. Don't let the stray bullet shatter the glass," he said, his voice dripping with mockery. Laughter erupted from behind. But then, crack! A sharp, crisp sound, decisive. The bullet hitting the target's center tore through the air like it was splitting the space in two, bouncing back from the wall behind. The echo wasn't loud, but in the taut atmosphere of the shooting room, it rang out like a thunderclap, striking everyone's forehead. The automated system clicked, pulling the target silently back toward the station. All eyes were locked on the bullseye approaching, as if hypnotized. Colton furrowed his brow and stepped forward, his feet freezing as he saw a single, neat, round hole, right in the center of the target. Not a millimeter off, not a shake, undeniable. The room fell into an absolute silence, so deep that one could almost hear the soft breathing of a child. Ethan. The boy jumped out of his seat, his tiny fists clenched, his eyes sparkling. "My mom's a superhero," Ethan shouted, his cheerful voice shattering the heavy silence like a joyful explosion. The entire room seemed to freeze. Some glanced at each other, some with surprise, some with confusion, and some even with a touch of embarrassment. Even Rebecca Johnson, the manager, always calm like a diplomat, blinked in surprise. She glanced at Colton, and in that instant what she hadn't expected was this. The confident man's face had turned a little pale. Colton snatched the target, pulling it toward him, inspecting it closely as though hoping to find a technical fault, a fake scratch, a sign of luck. But no, it was a clean shot, straight, right into the center like it had been guided by military-grade precision. He muttered something bitter that anyone could hear, the sting in his words leaking out after every syllable. Lucky shot. Rachel set the gun down on the table. No laughter, no arrogance. She simply stood there, her eyes locking with Colton's like a warning. This wasn't luck. This was a promise kept. And that was the moment when the people who had once mocked her began to whisper, no longer in ridicule, but in concern. Colton swallowed hard. For the first time, a flicker of fear appeared in his eyes. Colton Prescott's face remained frozen with a stiff expression as he placed the target down on the table. His eyes were glued to the single bullet hole, so perfect that even the most skeptical could not deny it. A part of him didn't want to believe it, while the other was seething with the truth. The simple woman had just humiliated him, right in front of his loyal audience and the elite crowd he always used to bolster his reputation. Colton scanned the room, trying to regain control by breaking the heavy silence now filling the space. He laughed loudly, the laughter forced, but enough to draw the attention of those wavering between cheering and hesitation. "Not bad, not bad at all," he said loudly, tossing the target onto the table like a game that had just ended. "But if everyone's going to be applauded for a lucky shot, maybe we should rename this place the Amateur Sports Center." All eyes turned back to Rachel. She stood silently. No rebuttal, no belittling of him. She didn't need to. That bullet hole had already said it all for her. Colton, sensing his position slipping away, stepped forward, his face softening as if preparing to introduce a new form of entertainment. "All right, Miss Carter." He deliberately emphasized her last name, as if he had just discovered a detail he could use to turn the tide. "I admit that shot wasn't bad, but if you're really that good, let's see it. Not just once, but 3 times in a row. Same distance, but this time from 75 yards. And I bet—" He pulled a check from his jacket pocket, the thick kind with gold trim, the sort you'd see at high-class parties in Boston. Then quickly drew a Mont Blanc pen, scribbling a number. $50,000. 3 shots, 3 bullseyes. If you can do it, the money will be transferred however you want. If not, you leave forever. A wave of murmurs spread across the room like an electric shock. People began pulling out their phones, recording. A few VIPs stood up, their eyes not leaving the woman standing before them. No longer the lost soul from Walmart, but an opponent that a champion now felt compelled to defeat at all costs. Rachel remained still, her eyes locked on Colton without blinking. Each word he spoke seemed like the paint peeling off his polished mask. Behind it wasn't confidence. It was fear disguised as aggression. Ethan, sitting on the waiting bench, lowered his head and looked at his mother, lips pressed together. Rachel felt the weight of his gaze. She turned, walked over to Ethan, and leaned down to whisper, "If you don't want me to continue, I'll walk away." Ethan shook his head. "You can't leave. I know you can do it, and him. He's just afraid of you." That small, clear sentence, innocent yet striking at the heart of what was unfolding, made Rachel smile. She stood up, turned back to Colton, and took a step forward, not in haste, not in arrogance, just steady. "I accept," she said, her voice calm as if she were choosing dinner. "But I have one condition." Colton frowned. "A condition?" "If I win, the entire sum will be donated to the Boston Veterans Support Fund, a real contribution, not just to save face, but to fix actual harm." The room stilled. That condition, though it sounded humble at first, felt like a slap to Colton's face, for it took away the one thing he had been desperately clinging to, control of the spotlight. "And if I lose," Rachel continued, "I will leave. But you have to stand in front of everyone here and say clearly, 'I shot fairly. No cheating, no help.' And that first shot wasn't luck, it was skill." Rebecca Johnson, the club manager, stepped forward from behind, trying to intervene. "Rachel, this could go further than you think." Colton cut her off. "I agree." He spoke so quickly that some around him were surprised. But deep inside, Colton knew he couldn't back down. To retreat now would be to accept that a nameless single mother had just made him fear her in front of the world. He turned to the audience, holding the check high. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a thrilling performance ahead. 75 yards, 3 shots, one brave woman, and me. Applause erupted, not as unified as before, but split into two factions, those backing Colton and those starting to see Rachel as something more than a surprise. When Rachel returned to the shooting position, Ethan quietly placed his small hand on the edge of the bench. "Dad would be so proud of you, Mom." She didn't respond, but inside, something stirred. Not fear, but the familiar state she'd known during training sessions with Logan. When the pressure gets so high you can't breathe, you don't need to think. Let your hands and heart do the rest. Behind Rachel's calm exterior, a real battle was beginning. Not just between bullets, but between pride and humility, privilege and dignity, showmanship and true grit. And if Colton thought he had just trapped her in a difficult position, he had no idea how a woman keeping a promise would fight. As Rachel bent down to load the magazine into the Glock, each movement seemed not guided by conscious thought, but by a deeper memory, the memory of the body, the memory of surviving through loss. The noise around her faded like a thin mist, and in the quiet stillness between the moments of preparation, she turned back to the past. On a spring day nearly 6 years ago, the sunlight gently illuminated Rachel's brown hair as she stood for the first time in the middle of an empty military shooting range, her hand trembling slightly as she held the Glock 19 Logan had just given her. "Try it first," Logan said, standing behind her, his voice deep and soft like the wind. "I don't think I can do it." Rachel shook her head. "You're breathing wrong." He smiled gently, stepping behind her and placing his hand on her shoulder. "Try this." He didn't pull her hand up like they do in movies. Instead, he adjusted her stance, a slight shift of weight, a little tension in the knees, and then held her hand still, letting it feel the weight of the gun. "Take a deep breath," Logan whispered. "Exhale halfway, hold it, then pull the trigger, not jerking, not pushing, just allow it to go." Rachel followed his instructions. The first shot veered off the target by nearly 6 inches. "There you go," Logan nodded, "and that's when you start learning." From that day on, every afternoon Logan had off became a short training session. Simple but steady, not like the romance of ordinary couples, but a connection between someone stepping out of darkness, trying to leave a mark before being pulled into the nameless void of war. He taught Rachel everything a novice needed to know: how to observe the wind without a gauge, how to read light reflected off objects, how to slow your heartbeat, not with pills, but with willpower. "I may never tell you what I've done out there," he once said, his fingers brushing lightly through her hair as they sat together after a session. "But every time we shoot, that's when you touch a part of me that no one else can." For Logan, the shooting range wasn't a place of competition. It was a place to connect souls. In his world, where the sound of gunfire was the final language, understood and used to survive, Rachel was the only one he trusted to share the unchanging principles of a true marksman. "You have something that many rookies lack," Logan once said on a golden afternoon. "What's that?" "Steady hands and a calm heart. You don't shake because you don't need to prove anything. That's the scariest thing in combat. Someone shooting who doesn't need to prove themselves." Rachel only smiled then. She didn't fully understand. But now, here in the shooting range of Elite Shooters Club, with every eye examining her every breath, every movement, Rachel understood more than ever. She remembered the last morning Logan left the house, before the fateful mission he didn't return from. He sat at the kitchen table, cleaning his gun before placing it in its box, his eyes fixed on the little notebook that contained the scope adjustments he'd written himself throughout his career. "If I don't come back," he hesitated, then looked into her eyes. "Keep this skill, not for revenge, but to keep going. Rachel nodded then, though she didn't fully understand. She thought she would never need it, but loss doesn't give notice. And when the flag-draped coffin was placed before her 3 years later, Rachel realized those afternoons with Logan on the shooting range were the last thread holding her to the world. Back in the present, Rachel opened her eyes. The sounds returned slowly. Distant whistles, the faint clink of metal on the table, Ethan's feet swinging on the wooden chair behind her. She took a deep breath, letting her heart find its familiar rhythm. Logan's image briefly passed behind the target. Not an illusion, but the spiritual presence she carried with her every time her finger touched the trigger. Far off, Colton Prescott stood with his body slightly angled, chatting with a sponsor in a dark blue suit, glancing at Rachel and smiling. But his expression no longer held ease. His eyes flicked to his watch occasionally, his patience beginning to wane, because he understood the game was no longer in his hands. Rebecca Johnson walked up to Rachel, holding a technical sheet for the weapons to be used in the next round of betting. "Are you sure you want to continue?" Rebecca asked softly, her voice much gentler than before. Rachel looked up, her eyes unwavering. "I'm not here to prove to them that I'm good. I'm here to keep a promise." Rebecca paused for a moment, then nodded slightly. Then, "Good luck." Rachel looked back at Ethan one last time before stepping toward the gun inspection area. The boy smiled and gave her a thumbs up. No more words needed. This was no longer a performance. This was a ritual. A sacred act passed from the hands of the fallen to the one who remained, to keep walking forward. And as Logan once said, every true marksman only has one important bullet. The bullet that tells you who you are. Rachel's final words, "I'm here to keep a promise," still echoed in Rebecca's mind as she quietly stepped back, giving space to the woman about to face the challenge. The crowd had started buzzing again, the air stretched tight with expectations, doubts, and a fair share of tension. Amidst all the eyes now focused on her, Rachel Carter walked to the 75-yard shooting position, the very place where Colton Prescott had broken records 3 times, and now was being used by him as a stage to dispose of someone he could not control. She stopped in front of the bench, gently placing the Glock down. One hand adjusted her belt, the other loosely gripping the gun's grip. The artificial breeze in the shooting range remained still, but Rachel could feel a storm lurking beneath Colton's calm expression. He stood at the end of the line, arms crossed, smiling like he already knew the outcome. "Lucky shots won't repeat 3 times, Miss Carter." He tossed the words like stones into the well. Rachel didn't respond. She took a deep breath. Not the quick, tense breath of someone on edge, but a slow, rhythmic one, the kind Logan had taught her to control as a survival skill. Breathe in deeply, hold for half a breath. Exhale a portion. When your heartbeat quiets, that's when you pull the trigger. The first shot. The sound of the gun rang out in an almost silent space. No whispers, no phones buzzing. Everyone seemed to hold their breath along with her. The target was pulled back, and in the center a neat round hole appeared. Bullseye. Ethan jumped from his seat. The boy clasped his hands together in front of his mouth, as if holding his breath along with his mother. Rachel didn't look back. She had returned to the familiar state. Eyes focused, spine steady, breath controlling the rhythm of the shot. The second shot. She adjusted her stance slightly, shifting her front foot a few inches to stabilize her hips. Her left hand held steady, not too tight. Her right index finger squeezed the trigger with the same precise pressure as the first time. The second shot rang out. The sound of the target being pulled back was even. The room buzzed a little more, no one yet daring to clap, but most had stood up. When the target came back, a collective "oh" escaped. Another bullseye. Colton clenched his jaw. He turned to a nearby assistant, muttering something, but then fell silent. He hadn't expected the woman in the green sweater and jeans to stand so firm under the pressure he had used to crush countless other shooters. The final shot. This time, Rachel took a bit longer to raise her hand. Before pulling the trigger, she glanced down at the thin wedding band on her left hand, then gently twisted it around her finger. A habit whenever she remembered Logan. No one but Ethan noticed the small gesture, but the boy understood. The tightening in his chest felt like a drumbeat. Dad is here. Both Dad and Mom are here. The final shot rang out like a blade slicing through the space. The target was slowly pulled back, the metallic sound echoing like the heartbeat of the crowd, all thumping in unison. The last target appeared. 3 round holes. 3 perfect positions, right in the center of the bullseyes. There was nothing left to argue, nothing to falsify. No one could fake this level of precision. Not at that distance, not with a gun that wasn't professionally modified. The room exploded in applause. Some stepped forward, slapping each other on the back. A few began filming, and the most senior members of the Elite Shooters Club stood silently, their eyes filled with respect. They knew it wasn't luck. This was real skill backed by unshakable resolve. Ethan jumped up, shouting, "Mom won! Mom's a real superhero." Rebecca Johnson couldn't hide her smile, a smile of surprise and respect. She stepped forward in the center of the room, microphone in hand. Rachel Carter has completed the 3-shot challenge at 75 yards with absolute accuracy. And as per the terms previously stated, the $50,000 will be sent directly to the Boston Veterans Support Fund. The room erupted in applause, except for Colton Prescott. He still stood there, his face devoid of any color. He smiled, but it was a cold, rigid, and bitter smile. Good, very good, a performance worth watching. He clapped, but only he heard the sound. Then, he tilted his head and took a step forward. But I didn't come here to watch a show. I came here to compete. And if you think a few bullets will make me back down, you're wrong. Everyone fell silent. Colton pulled a thin file from his jacket, throwing it onto the table near Rachel. 1 week from now, an official competition. 10 stations, 10 different guns. All provided by the club under the supervision of the board. You and me. If you win, I'll donate another $100,000. If you lose, you leave the shooting world forever. The air was thick with tension. Ethan looked up at his mother, confused. Rachel looked down at the file, then lifted her gaze and locked eyes with Colton. Her voice was steady, unwavering. I accept, but this time I'm not fighting for fame. I'm fighting to end your arrogance. And from that moment on, the battle was no longer between 2 people. It was between 2 worlds. One side was privilege, the other was true grit. One side used money to dominate, the other used memory to survive. I accept, Rachel replied with a calmness that was almost unsettling. But this time, I'm not fighting for my reputation. I'm fighting to end your arrogance. That was the last thing she said before the entire room fell into a tense, uneasy silence, where excitement turned into anxiety and admiration shifted into suspicion. As Rachel left the room, holding Ethan's hand amidst congratulations from a few neutral members, Colton Prescott remained standing in the center, his eyes narrowing as though he had just seen a ghost in a mirror he thought he controlled. But in truth, Colton wasn't afraid. He was angry. Angry because for the first time, His perfect facade had been ripped apart by an anonymous woman with nothing but raw skill. Hours later, in his private office on the second floor of the Elite Shooters Club, a space accessible only to senior members, Colton slammed the door behind him, switched on his desk lamp, and opened his personal laptop. In the dim light, he pulled out his phone, dialed a familiar number, and waited through 2 rings. "Mitch, I need you at the club now. Bring the trigger pull gauge and the recoil compensator. Also, the sight alignment tools. No staff needed. We'll handle this quietly." On the other end, Mitch Hargrove, a veteran gunsmith who had been Colton's personal technician at state-level competitions, answered tersely. "She's not an amateur, is she?" Colton paused for a moment. "She's a threat." And to Colton, threats were never allowed to linger for long. 4 days before the competition. In the armory of the Elite Shooters Club, a restricted area accessed only by biometric code, Mitch Hargrove stood beside a gun rack, disassembling the Macmillan TAC 338, a sniper rifle Colton had requested for station number 10, a station worth 30% of the total points. Colton stood behind him, arms crossed, his voice low. "I want her to be unable to achieve the expected accuracy, not too obvious, but enough to throw her off by a few inches at 800 yards. Mitch glanced at him. "I can adjust the trigger pull by 1.2 pounds and shift the point of impact a quarter minute of angle left. She won't notice unless she checks with a laser, and she certainly doesn't have the equipment." Colton nodded, his gaze unblinking. "Good, but remember, don't leave any trace. Rebecca Johnson will check all the guns." Mitch pursed his lips. "You're breaking club rules." Colton turned, his eyes cold. "I am the law here." Meanwhile, in a small apartment in South Boston, Rachel sat before Logan's old notebook, its pages yellowed and filled with calculations on wind drift, distance, and sight correction formulas under harsh combat conditions. Ethan sat nearby, coloring a world map with crayons, occasionally glancing at his mother, as if fearing that if he looked away for even a moment, she would vanish into the nameless sadness of the past. Rachel took a deep breath, turning to the last page, where Logan had written a note. "If you're reading this, it means I'm no longer here, but it also means you're still intact." She closed the notebook, as if sealing a part of her consciousness. She didn't know that, at that very moment, the man she was about to face was setting the stage for an unfair competition. 2 days before the competition, Rebecca Johnson entered the armory to check the list of weapons for the event, a required procedure. She passed over each rifle, her gaze lingering longer on the Macmillan TAC 338. An odd feeling rose, not from the rifle's appearance, but from a sense that something wasn't right. Rebecca had used this very rifle in an internal competition. It had a different recoil. Right now, the trigger felt heavier, and the sight seemed misaligned from the original calibration she remembered. That's strange. She reached for a testing device, but at that moment Colton entered. "I heard you're inspecting the rifles." Rebecca started, stifling her discomfort. "I'm just following procedure. Station 10 uses the TAC 338. I just want to make sure everything is honest." Colton smiled, but there was no warmth behind it. "Honest, huh? You think I need to cheat to beat a single mother?" Rebecca didn't respond, but as Colton left, she quietly marked the rifle, leaving a small scratch behind the sight to see if anyone tampered with it after her check. The day of the competition was approaching, and on 2 opposing sides, 2 people prepared for a battle, but only one was playing by the rules. Rachel still believed this was a contest between experience and truth. She didn't know that the game had been rigged from the start, and she was walking right into a trap, sweetly laid with noble laughter and the polished exterior of the elite. But Colton forgot one thing. Logan had once said, "Truth doesn't need the most advanced weapons. It just needs someone determined enough not to back down." And Rachel Carter had never learned how to back down. Outside the small apartment window in South Boston, the evening passed quietly. The last rays of sunlight filtered through the potted plants Rachel had grown on the balcony, gentle like memories. In the kitchen, Ethan was flipping through his unfinished math book, working on problems while occasionally glancing over at his mother, where she was carefully wiping down the Glock with an old cloth, her movements slow, as if peeling away the layers of dry memories that had settled on the cold metal. From deep within her, a restless feeling rose. It felt as though she was stepping into a battle where her opponent had a machine gun, and she only had her bare hands, though she knew that skill, spirit, and experience were weapons Colton could never measure. A knock on the door. Knock, knock, knock. Rachel looked up. The knock wasn't hurried or loud, but had the rhythm of someone familiar with military discipline. She placed the gun down, walked over to open the door, and froze. Standing before her was a tall man, in his 40s, with broad shoulders like a sculpture, a stern face with a small scar running from his chin to his ear. His hair was a mix of black and silver, cut short, and his eyes were deep but still, as if he had spent many years living between the lines of life and death. He wore a faded windbreaker, no weapons, no jewelry, just an old frayed badge attached to his pocket. SEAL Team 6. "Rachel Carter?" His voice was low, firm. "I'm Brooks, Commander Brooks." Rachel furrowed her brow. The name wasn't unfamiliar. Logan had mentioned him. "You were in Baghdad with Logan?" Brooks nodded. "In 2016, and I was the last person to see Logan before his final mission." She froze. A cold current ran down her spine. Brooks reached into his coat pocket, pulling out a small, worn leather notebook, its edges stained with water. "Logan asked me to give this to you, but at the time I wasn't ready. Now it's time." Rachel took the notebook with both hands, as if holding a piece of her late husband's soul. When she opened it, she found the first pages filled with tactical diagrams, distance calculations, and sight adjustment formulas, followed by training notes, the private symbols between Logan and those he had trained. But there was one page folded, the middle page. It contained only one neatly written line. "If you're reading this, it means I'm no longer here, but Brooks will find you, because you're the only one I trusted when I couldn't come back. And if you need to fight, don't fight alone." Rachel froze. Her hands trembled slightly. Ethan, from the kitchen, stepped out, looking at his mother and the strange man with a curious but wary expression. Brooks smiled at the boy. "You must be Ethan, right? You look just like your father." He then turned to Rachel, lowering his voice. "I know you're about to face an unfair competition. I know who Colton Prescott is, and he never plays fair. But Logan knew that too, and he believed that if you needed a fighting skill, the person who should be behind you is me." Rachel stared at the man, and for the first time in years, she saw Logan not in her memories, but in the eyes of his old teammate, steady, unyielding, yet full of humanity. "You want to help me?" Rachel asked. Brooks nodded slightly. "Number. I have to help you. Logan saved my life in Mosul, and I promise to return that favor by protecting the most precious thing he ever had." That same afternoon, they went to an old military range where Brooks had trained as a temporary instructor after his discharge. There, he opened a wooden crate containing a replica of the Macmillan TAC-338, the same model Rachel would use at Station 10 during the competition. "I have a source inside the elite club," Brooks said while assembling the gun. "Colton has tampered with the configuration of the main tack. The sight alignment is off, the trigger weight is increased, the stock is looser than standard. Anyone unfamiliar with it will miss by at least 3 inches at 800 yards. Rachel clenched her jaw. He dares. He had to, because he knows that if it's just based on skill, he can't win. For the next 3 hours, Brooks didn't let Rachel rest. He trained her like a special ops recruit, shooting under changing elevations, simulating wind, adjusting sights under real-time pressure, and most importantly, training her reflexes after the first shot to avoid the repeat error effect. Ethan sat behind, holding a stopwatch, his eyes never leaving his mother's every shot. "Mom, you've got the right angle. The wind's stronger than before," he shouted when he saw the wind shift the flag to the right. Rachel smiled. Brooks nodded too, his voice hoarse from the afternoon heat. "The boy's sharp, and you're better than you think." Before leaving the range, Brooks handed Rachel a small black fabric bag. "This is something Logan kept from his service. It's a replica of his personal sight adjustment formula, with notes for each type of terrain." Rachel looked down at the faded writing on the fabric. "Only the calm survive." She took a deep breath and then looked up at Brooks. "Do you think I can win?" Brooks stared at Rachel for a long time, his gaze unwavering. "I think Logan picked the right person to trust, and I never doubt his choice." Rachel gripped the fabric bag tightly and nodded. She was no longer entering the competition to answer a challenge. She was there to fulfill the mission of the husband who had fallen 3 years ago, to protect honor, keep a promise, and not allow injustice to persist on the very ground Logan had once fought for. That morning, the sky over Boston was a pure, cloudless blue, as though nature itself had paused to witness a confrontation that was no longer just between 2 individuals, but between 2 opposing worlds. One side the arrogant power of one who was used to standing at the peak, and on the other, a woman who had lost everything but had returned with an unshakable belief. Rachel Carter walked through the main gate of the Elite Shooters Club, her hand tightly holding Ethan's small hand. The boy was wearing the blue shirt Logan had bought for him, with the words, "Stay calm," embroidered on the cuff, an unspoken sign of unwavering resolve. Rachel's hand trembled slightly, not out of fear, but because every gaze on her carried a different weight. Suspicion, scrutiny, sympathy, disdain, and even expectation. As they stepped in, the air seemed to freeze. Whispers rose. "Is that her? I heard she's the wife of a SEAL operative." Probably just a lucky shot. But in the last row, to the left of the stands, a group of people stood up. No suits, no uniforms, no banners. They only wore small badges shaped like anchor symbols, the insignia of SEAL Team. There was Commander Brooks, and 3 others Rachel had never met, but recognized immediately by the way they stood, silently but never still, as if the world could vanish, but they would remain, guarding her back. Ethan turned to his mother and whispered, "Mom, are they Dad's friends?" Rachel didn't answer. She only tightened her grip on her son's hand and nodded slightly. Her throat tightened, but her legs did not waver. And then, from the far right of the shooting range, the sound of boots striking the wooden floor rang out clearly. Colton Prescott appeared. Wearing the Oakley competition uniform, adorned with logos from his sponsors, he walked as though he were on a catwalk. Beside him were his technical assistant, 2 media representatives, and 3 private cameramen. His half-smile wasn't a greeting, but a declaration of power. He walked over to Rachel, bowed his head slightly like a gentleman, then leaned in close and whispered, "You won't be able to handle the pressure. This isn't a place for a single mother. This playground is for champions, not for those living off the dead." The words landed like a knife deep into her most painful memory. Rachel looked up at him, her eyes no longer those of a lonely mother. They were the eyes of someone who had learned how to rise from destruction, carrying that pain as part of her armor. "You're right," she replied, her voice small but clear with every word. "I'm not a champion. I'm just someone you'll never properly judge." Colton hesitated for a moment, then smirked and turned away. But his face no longer wore the same self-assurance as when he first entered. The competition consisted of 10 shooting stations, each with a different weapon and stance. Standing, sitting, prone, shooting over obstacles, shooting under noise interference. The stands were set up like a semi-professional arena, with large LED screens displaying scores, timers, and close-up footage from the cameras on the guns. The organizers announced that Station 10, where the McMillan TAC 338 would be used, would be worth 3 times the points and would determine the final ranking. Rebecca Johnson, the technical supervisor, quietly approached Rachel and said softly, "I've checked all the stations, but there are still some unclear points I'm not allowed to interfere with. Be cautious with the final station. I left a small mark on the gun's body. If it's gone, it means someone has tampered with it after my inspection." Rachel nodded, her hand tightening around the fabric bag containing Logan's notebook. Ethan stood beside her, whispering, "I'll count every shot you take. I'm your teammate, remember?" She turned to her son, bent down, and whispered in his ear, "And you're the reason I can never be afraid." The competition began. Colton took the lead at stations 1 through 3, with expert technique, incredible speed, and perfect coordination with modern sporting rifles. Every time he finished, the crowd of sponsors clapped, congratulating him as though he had already won. But from Station 4 onwards, Rachel began to pull ahead. She wasn't fast, but she was precise. Each shot seemed as if it had been calculated in advance. Every breath, every movement, all bearing the marks of someone trained in a way no textbook could ever record. The audience grew quieter. Many began to leave the snack tables to stand at the barriers, watching her with eyes that had begun to change noticeably. By Station 8, the score between them had narrowed to just 0.2 points. Colton began to lose patience. He signaled to his assistant to adjust his ear protection, quickly wiped his hands with a sanitizing cloth, but these movements no longer exuded the ease they once had. His eyes were twitching. As for Rachel, each time she finished a station, she turned to look at Ethan sitting in the SEAL team's section and smiled. Just that, then she moved on. No need for congratulations. No need for showboating, because she wasn't here to be a hero. She was here to keep a promise. When Station 9 ended, the results were announced. Rachel Carter and Colton Prescott were tied. The final station would decide everything. Colton walked past Rachel, his shoulder brushing against hers. "Enjoy this moment. You won't have another chance." Rachel didn't turn around, but Ethan stood up, shouting toward Colton, "My mom never gives up, you know." The stands erupted in light laughter, but no one mocked. Because now the whole room understood. This woman was no longer someone to be underestimated. She was a symbol of something more enduring than victory. And ahead, the McMillan TAC 338 was waiting. The sound of the final gunshot still echoed as Rachel completed her last shot at Station 9. The technical judge raised his hand, signaling the end, and the entire crowd erupted into applause, louder than at any other moment before. The electronic scorecard gradually lit up, and then all fell silent as the last 3 digits appeared. Rachel Carter, 89.3. Colton Prescott, 89.3. A tie. In the stands, Ethan jumped out of his seat shouting, "Go, Mom, you're winning. Just one more station." Rachel turned her head, smiling at her son. That smile wasn't one of victory or showboating, but the quiet light of faith. She nodded gently, then turned back, walking straight toward the final station, where a massive sniper rifle lay waiting on the stand. Macmillan, TAC-338. A sniper rifle designed for long-range military missions, with near-perfect accuracy when in the hands of those with hundreds of hours of real-life training. But today, that gun might not be as honest as its exterior. She had heard Brooks' warning. Rebecca had whispered about the small sign behind the sight. And now, standing before this weapon, Rachel knew. Everything had been tampered with. But instead of panicking, she quietly opened the fabric bag and pulled out Logan's notebook. On the last page, the handwritten words in black ink were still there, as if waiting for this moment. When everything is against you, trust the one thing no one can touch: your breath. Guns can be tampered with, the wind can shift, but breath, that's the final freedom of a marksman. Colton Prescott sat across, adjusting his gloves, his eyes as cold as steel. He had just completed his round with an impressive result: 9 out of 10 shots within the inner ring. The media around him had already begun preparing the victory cover photos. "She just needs to miss one shot to lose," he whispered to his assistant. "And if she hits them all?" "Impossible. With that gun, even I nearly missed." He laughed, but that smile was not as steady as before. Rachel lay on the shooting bench. Ethan sat just behind the barrier, gripping the rail tightly, his eyes strained, almost not blinking. Brooks stood further away, arms crossed, his gaze following every breath she took as if still in training. The first shot. Rachel adjusted her position, resting her cheek on the rifle's stock. She felt the trigger weight increase, clearly beyond the allowable limit. The sight was slightly off to the left. No time for correction or complaints. She had only one option: adapt. "Wind 6 o'clock, moderate," she whispered. "Trigger weight up, left drift. Need to add more focus on shoulder pressure." She shifted her left shoulder slightly, keeping her breath steady, just like Logan had taught her. Her right hand squeezed the trigger, slow and steady. Bang! The distant target echoed with a hollow sound, then slowly moved back. Bullseye. The stands erupted. Ethan jumped up. Colton straightened in his seat, his smile fading for a moment. The second shot. Rachel adjusted her breathing, this time adding 0.2 minutes of angle for the left drift according to Logan's formula. Though she had never worked with a gun that had been altered thanks to the quick training with Brooks, she no longer shot instinctively. She shot from the database that had lived in her blood. Bang! Bullseye number 2. Colton leaned forward. Sweat beaded on his forehead, and he glanced at the supervisor. No one spoke, but the atmosphere was shifting toward Rachel, as if everyone was starting to believe they were witnessing the impossible. The third shot. Rachel began to feel her right shoulder tense. This rifle was heavier than the one she had used before. Each shot reverberated through her body with considerable force. But she didn't hesitate. Now, she wasn't shooting for the score. She was communicating with the memory of her late husband. She gently touched her wedding ring, rotating it once. "Logan, this is when I need you here." Bang. Bullseye number 3. The stands erupted. Some people stood up, others raised their phones to capture the moment. Rebecca Johnson raised her hand to her mouth, eyes wet. Brooks clenched his fist lightly, saying nothing. Ethan couldn't contain himself, shouting, "3 shots! Mom did it! Mom is the best in the world!" As for Rachel, she still didn't smile, because she knew the remaining 7 shots were waiting, and just one miss, and everything would collapse. The next 4 shots. One at a time, Rachel adjusted according to her personal formula. Occasionally, she paused for a few seconds to steady her breath. The wind began to shift, blowing from the 4 o'clock angle. She adjusted the scope, following exactly what Logan had written in his notebook. Crosswind, slow heartbeat, shoulder pull back. Bang, 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 4 shots, 4 bullseyes. Colton began to stand up from his seat. His face hardened. The entire sponsorship team fell silent. In the stands, those who had once been Logan's teammates, now witnesses to his legacy, stood up, hands over their hearts as if saluting. Only 3 shots left. Rachel breathed evenly. Her eyes were starting to tire. Her shoulder was beginning to ache, but she still held tight to the memories like an anchor in the ocean of pressure. In her mind, she heard Logan's voice again. "You have the steadiest hands I've ever seen. Not because you're strong, but because you never let fear overwhelm you." Bang. Bang. 2 more shots, 2 more bullseyes. Everyone had already stood, only 1 shot left. Rachel didn't look at Ethan. She didn't look at the stands. She couldn't hear her heartbeat anymore, only the rhythm of her breath, as if everything had stopped. She placed her finger on the trigger, gently squeezed, made one last adjustment. Bang! The bullet flew like a silver line. The target in the distance shook slightly. A few seconds later, the historic moment appeared on the LED screen. 10 out of 10. Bullseye. The stands erupted. Some people were crying. Some were cheering loudly. Some simply stood still, their hands placed on their foreheads in a military salute, not for the winner, but for the one who kept her promise. Colton Prescott was frozen. Ethan ran over to hug his mother tightly, tears streaming down his face. He whispered, "I knew you would win. I knew Dad knew too." Rachel knelt down, holding her son. On the screen, the words appeared. Champion, Rachel Carter. The cheer from the stands echoed like crashing waves, filling the entire elite Shooters Club range. On the LED screen, the words, Rachel Carter, 10 out of 10 bullseye, flashed between the victory symbol. But in the competition area, no one moved. Everyone stood still, as if hypnotized by what they had just witnessed. An ordinary woman, not a professional marksman, not sponsored, not welcomed by anyone. Yet she had outperformed the record holder Colton Prescott with the very rifle that had been tampered with to hinder her. Ethan ran towards her, leaping into her arms. "Dad will be so proud of you," he whispered, tears streaming down his face. Rachel hugged her son, her face sweaty but her eyes shining bright. She no longer felt the weight of the disdainful stares, the heavy Macmillan rifle, or the shock waves running through her shoulder. Everything faded away in Ethan's embrace. In the sound of their hearts beating together, she knew Logan had been there from start to finish. But not everyone was rejoicing. Colton Prescott, the man who had just suffered defeat, stood frozen behind the judge's table. His face had gone pale, like chalk. At first, he tried to keep calm, forcing a tight smile, then slowly clapping as if applauding a lucky win. But when the spotlight shone on the scoreboard again, and when the whole room began chanting Rachel's name, his mask fell. He stepped forward, snatched the target from the referee, and examined it closely. "No way, no way, this is cheating." His voice screeched like a knife, cutting through the joyous atmosphere. Some people in the crowd looked at each other, confused. Rebecca Johnson, the technical supervisor, stepped out from the left wing, holding a tablet and a security folder. Her gaze was sharp, her voice calm yet chilling. "We've heard enough, Mr. Prescott." Colton turned sharply. "Who are you to interfere?" "I am the one overseeing the entire system of equipment for today's competition, and I have something to announce." The LED screen immediately switched to the internal security interface. Rebecca connected the tablet, and within seconds a surveillance video began to play. The footage was from the night. The elite club's weapons room. 2 men dressed in black snuck in, one wearing a mask and gloves. In the infrared light, the image clearly showed them opening the Macmillan TAC-338 box, disassembling the scope, replacing the trigger spring, and adjusting the sight alignment. Rebecca pointed to the screen. "The man on the left is your technician, Colton. The other is your personal assistant who you brought with the media team." Colton began to retreat, his face drained. He stammered, I didn't know about this. Maybe someone set me up." Rebecca held up the sealed envelope. The access log from the keycard system, the fingerprint recognition system, and the phone recording from the club's office shows that you authorized them to enter the weapon maintenance area at 2:12 a.m. 3 days ago. The murmurs in the room grew louder. Elite Shooters Club board members began whispering to each other. One of them, an elderly man with gray hair, wearing a veteran badge, stood up, his voice thick with anger. "Colton Prescott, not only have you cheated, you've dishonored the entire membership and tarnished our reputation." Colton screamed, like an animal cornered. "She's not a member, not formally trained. She has a husband who's a SEAL. Maybe she learned from him. This is unfair." Rebecca stepped closer, unafraid. Yes, her husband was a SEAL, a man who sacrificed for this country, and today she used the skills he taught her to win, under the very conditions you created to trap her. If there's any injustice here, it's that she still won, despite all your schemes from the start. The entire room went silent. A veteran in the front row placed his hand on his chest, then raised 3 fingers in a military salute to those who upheld their honor. Immediately others followed suit. No one chanted slogans, no one spoke. It was simply silence and respect. Ethan looked up at Brooks, confused. "What are they doing, Mr. Brooks?" Brooks bent down and whispered, saluting the one who kept her word. Later that day, the board of directors issued a statement. The championship title was revoked, and Colton Prescott's name was removed from the rankings. Criminal charges were filed for organized cheating. The honorary title of Shooter of the Year was awarded to Rachel Carter, the only non-industry person ever to receive such an honor. Media, television, and social media quickly picked up the story. From being a dismissed single mother, Rachel became a symbol of resilience, integrity, and loyalty, not only to her son, but to the husband she had lost. And at the end of that day, when everything had settled and the stadium was empty, Rachel stood before the final target, holding Ethan's hand. "Do you see? We don't need to be loud, we don't need to stand out. We just need to do what's right, no matter who's watching or not." Ethan nodded, his eyes sparkling with pride. "Mom, when I grow up, I want to do just like you." Rachel bent down, touching her forehead to her son's, silent tears falling. Colton Prescott's shout still echoed throughout the arena, a denial of reality ringing out. "She cheated. This is all staged." He lunged toward the organizers, his face flushed, his eyes wild from the unacceptably bitter defeat. The sponsors standing behind him began to back away, avoiding eye contact, pulling away quietly. A few discreetly removed their logos from their name tags. The so-called King of American Sharpshooters was now as exposed as a child caught stealing. Rebecca Johnson, the woman who had stood silently since the beginning, finally stepped onto the main stage. She didn't need a microphone. Every ear in the room was straining to hear her. "I used to be a professional shooter," she began, her voice deep and firm as steel. "I've seen many types of losses, but never one as dirty and shameless as yours, Colton Prescott." She raised the tablet, played the security footage again, this time in slow motion, zooming in to show every detail. "These are your men. They're dismantling the scope. They're replacing the trigger spring. Here is your electronic signature in the security system, authorizing these two to enter the weapons room at 2:12 a.m., and here's the recording of your phone call to your assistant. Make sure she doesn't make it past Station 10. The room fell dead silent. Then, like a domino effect, the crowd erupted in angry reactions. A few people stood up, throwing their membership cards to the ground. An elderly woman, a former national shooting champion from the 90s, pulled out her phone and called the press. "We've supported a fraud," she said, "and now it's time for the truth to come out." Colton took a step back, as if the ground beneath him was collapsing, his face drained of color. When he turned to the sponsors, those who had patted him on the back, those who had called him the Golden Boy, now turned away coldly. A few even stepped toward Rachel, trying to shake her hand, apologize. But Rachel simply lowered her head gently, not responding. Ethan, standing beside his mother, whispered, "Mom, why is he doing this?" Rachel bent down, brushing her son's hair, her gaze softening. "Because some people think reputation is everything. When they see someone better but don't understand why, they choose to sabotage instead of learn." Less than an hour later, the Elite Shooters Club Board held an emergency meeting. With the presence of veteran members, journalists, and representatives from the Veterans Organization, they issued an official statement. Colton Prescott's title, awards, and membership were revoked. All evidence of cheating was handed over to the authorities for criminal prosecution. A permanent ban was placed on Colton Prescott for any professional sports activities related to his name. And finally, the honorary title of Honor Marksman was awarded to Rachel Carter in recognition of her skill, resilience, and integrity. That evening, the media across the U.S. exploded with headlines. "Single mother beats national champion and exposes cheating right on the shooting range." Rachel Carter, from the shadows of the gym to a national symbol of honor. A video capturing the moment Rachel made her 10th bullseye, the bullet flying like a streak of light in the quiet afternoon sunlight, spread across the internet at lightning speed. The comments flooded in. I cried, not because of the victory, but because of the way that boy looked at his mom like she was a superhero. She didn't just win, she restored our faith in honest sportsmanship. Colton Prescott used to be a champion, but Rachel Carter is a legend. In a quiet corner of the now empty stadium, Rebecca found Rachel. In her hand, she held a small envelope stamped with the seal of the National Veterans Support Foundation. "They just sent you an official invitation," Rebecca said. "They want you to help develop a therapeutic shooting training program for veterans suffering from PTSD and for the families of fallen soldiers." Rachel stood silent for a moment. Then she opened the envelope and pulled out the invitation. On it was the line, "We believe that those who know suffering best are the ones who teach the healing process." She looked up, her eyes filled with tears, but her voice steady. "I'll do it. But not because I won today, but because I want those who have lost, like me, to know they're not alone." A few weeks after the competition ended, on a quiet early morning at the Veterans' new training center, Rachel Carter stood alone on the shooting range, holding the Glock 19 that had been with her throughout her journey. The early sunlight filtered through the trees, casting a soft glow on the words engraved solemnly on the concrete wall behind her. Shadow Range, in honor of Master Chief Logan Carter. The name of her late husband, now etched into history, not by military achievements, but by the quiet battle of a wife, a single mother, and a keeper of promises. Rachel was invited by the Veterans Foundation to become the lead instructor for the Therapeutic Marksmanship Program, an initiative aimed at helping veterans overcome PTSD through shooting skills, training in a controlled environment with ample emotional support. Her lessons went beyond just hand placement, trigger control, or aiming techniques. They carried something no textbook could teach: the will to overcome loss. In each class, Rachel didn't wear the typical trainer uniform like the others. She remained herself, a light blue shirt, neat jeans, her hair tied back, and a voice calm but warm. And always by her side was the 10-year-old boy with the bright smile and proud gaze, Ethan. He had become her unofficial assistant, often sitting by the corner, cleaning guns, checking ammunition boxes, or helping set up equipment. "My mom beat the national champion," Ethan would proudly announce to the new veterans, making the class laugh, while Rachel just smiled and shook her head. One day, as the class finished, an older Marine, gray-haired, still recovering from an old injury, stayed behind and placed a hand on Rachel's shoulder. "You didn't just teach me how to shoot, you taught me how to stand tall again." Rachel didn't answer. She simply handed him a form, the application for the Logan Shadow Carter Excellence in Marksmanship Scholarship. The scholarship was established with the funds from the fines, compensation, and honorary donations after Colton Prescott was convicted of cheating. The foundation reported over 150 applications within 3 weeks, from veterans to the children of Special Forces soldiers, to the wives who had lost their husbands on the battlefield. All wrote letters explaining why they wanted to learn shooting. Not to beat anyone, but to heal themselves. And more than anything, the scholarship wasn't just about financial aid. It was a message. Logan's legacy had never faded, and Rachel had turned memory into action, turning pain into the path forward. On a fall afternoon, the center held a ceremony to honor the first students who completed the therapeutic shooting course. Ethan, wearing a white shirt with a slightly askew tie, stepped up to the podium to introduce the speaker. "Hello, I'm Ethan Carter, and today, the person who will speak isn't just my mom, but the one who taught me what bravery is, what keeping a promise means, and how to return to life after loss." The whole auditorium applauded as Rachel stepped up. She held the microphone with both hands, stood tall, her gaze meeting everyone in the room before she spoke in a calm, resolute tone. "A year ago, I walked into that shooting range just to keep a promise to my late husband. I didn't expect that from a moment of humiliation I would find myself again. But today I am not standing here because I've beaten anyone. I am standing here because I understand. The true winner is the one who never gives up." She looked at Ethan, then continued, "We can't erase the pain, but we can use it to guide those who are still trapped. And if I, a single mother who was once underestimated, can do this, then anyone in this room can." The ceremony ended with the shadow pins being awarded to the students. On each pin, a small inscription was carefully engraved: "Stand firm, even as darkness surrounds." It was the motto Logan Carter had handwritten in his tactical notebook, now the guiding spirit for a new generation. Warm lights cascaded down onto the center stage in the National Veterans Center's auditorium, where the first ever Logan Shadow Carter Scholarship Ceremony was being held with great dignity. The rows of seats were packed. On the walls, a portrait of Logan, dressed in his SEAL uniform, with a determined gaze, hung between a laurel wreath, below which was a metal inscription, honoring the one who passed on skills not to kill, but to survive, and to inspire hope. At the center of the stage, Rachel Carter stood on the wooden podium, gripping the microphone, behind her a large screen replaying moments from her journey. Her first shot at the Elite Shooters Club, the moment she hugged Ethan after the competition, and the image of the boy cleaning the gun by his mother. Ethan, now taller, sat in the front row in a neatly tailored gray suit. His face was lifted, his eyes sparkling as if reflecting the pride of a child who had witnessed his mother overcome the world itself. Rachel looked out over the crowd, which included not only veterans but also mothers, wives, and children, lives marked by loss that only they could understand. Her voice rang out, unwavering, not high-pitched, but strong as the wind that blows through the hardened steel forged in sorrow. I am not a warrior. I am a wife, a mother, and someone who kept a promise. She paused for a beat, as if letting the hearts of everyone there listen in sync with her own. If you've ever been underestimated, ever been pushed to the margins, remember, silence is not weakness. It could be the place where true strength lies dormant. There were soft sighs, nods of agreement. In the corner of the room, a veteran leaned his head against his wife's chest, hiding a tear. A young woman, the first recipient of the scholarship, hugged the notebook with the Shadow logo on its cover tightly to her chest. Ethan, sitting next to Brooks and his father's old teammates, bit his lip tightly, as if swallowing all the rising emotions inside him. Rachel continued. A year ago, I stepped onto the shooting range not to prove anything, but simply to keep a promise. I never imagined that small act would open the door to such a grand journey. But what I've learned is this: everything that truly matters begins with a promise. A promise to Logan, a promise to Ethan, and now a promise to all of you, that here, in a place bearing his name, will always be a safe haven for anyone who has ever felt left behind. She paused, then pulled from her chest pocket a small velvet-covered item. When she opened it, it was Logan's wedding ring. She held it up, gently rotating it under the stage lights, as if to show the world that love never dies, it just changes form. I once wore this ring as a mark of grief, but today I return it as a symbol of continuity. She turned toward the representative of the foundation and placed the ring in a crystal display case. This will be the sacred object of the center. Each time a student graduates, we will touch it, to remind us, strength does not come from defeating others, but from not letting loss drown us. The applause rang out, but not the loud, boisterous type. It was deep, quiet, slow, like a vow made by all who sat there. Brooks pulled out a handkerchief, pretending to wipe away sweat. Ethan ran up to the stage, hugging his mother as the applause continued. Rachel bent down and whispered softly into his ear, "Look how far we've come, haven't we?" "You promised, and you kept your word," Ethan replied, tightening his embrace. That night, Rachel sat alone on the bench outside the back of the center. The night breeze rustled through the air. In her hand was Logan's notebook. The final page now had a fresh ink stroke, written by her own hand. The promise is fulfilled, but the journey has just begun. She closed her eyes and placed her hand over her heart. No longer standing on the sidelines, no longer a victim of the past. She was the guide. And from then on, Rachel Carter's journey, from a single mother humiliated at a shooting range to the head of a movement healing with skill and courage, became the quiet but powerful symbol of an era. As she once said, "Never underestimate the silence of a mother, because in it there may be the echo of an entire generation that refuses to bow down." If this story has touched you, don't forget to like the video, share it with those who need inspiration, and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss out on more emotional and empowering stories like this one, because sometimes the forgotten ones are the ones who hit the heart of the world.